Yeah, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Christie David. I run a mortgage broking business called Atelier Wealth, where we help property investors start out, scale up their portfolios. And the reason behind our podcast episodes is to provide useful information to help investors make better quality decisions. And as part of that, we like to bring in guests who live, eat, breathe, sleep property investing. It's the heart and soul of their business, forms a big part of their life, and they know the investor pain points, but also how to get past them and scale up their portfolios with that minimum frustration. So having said that, I'm also joined this year by one of our team members today, Damien Walker. Welcome.
G'day, Aaron.
Making your debut, which is nice.
Very exciting. Very exciting.
Great to have you here. And I call you mortgage broker, but I'd also refer to you as first-time buyer extraordinaire. And I think that's one of the things we want to have a chat to everyone today about. But I would also want to introduce our guest who, if you've picked up a copy of the AFR, if you've done any type of researching when it comes to property investing, you will know about getting a depreciation schedule. And one of the main men that you will hear featured in the news is Mike Mortlock from MCG Quantity Surveyors. G'day, Mike. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much for having me.
Mate, thank you very much for your time and your energy. And mate, really keen to have a chat today about your area of expertise as well, but also I learn a little bit about you and your own journey and what you've been on as well, mate. So kind of kicking off, I've seen that you've built MCG. You've kind of gone on a really good trajectory of success. That doesn't happen by mistake or doesn't happen overnight as well. So I'd like to learn about your growth professionally, but also personally, and also a little bit more about your own journey on the property side as well, if you want to indulge. I know that I had a read, you say an amateur triathlete. I want to see how amateur you are as opposed to, I think you sold yourself a bit short there, mate, as well.
Essentially, I'm now moving into a retired triathlete. I've turned 40 not that long ago. All my PBs are behind me, but
I've just turned 40 myself, mate. I'd say 40 is the new 30. Isn't what they're saying, according to Novak Djokovic?
They could say 90's the new 15, but I don't think I'd be out sprinting my 15-year-old self at 90s. But look, I've got a lot of life ahead of me, and there's some great precedents for triathletes in their late 30s, winning the Hawaii Ironman. But with family and business life, triathlon's a very sort of selfish sport. So I've probably had my run. I was lucky enough to scrape onto the Australian team for a race at the Worlds in London back 2012 or thereabouts. And just hang up. I've hung up the tri shorts since then.
I mean, something like that, probably you don't ever lose that quest for staying fit and healthy. And I mean, triathletes are such a breed, I think they're incredible. Run, swim, bike. It's a real talent, mate. Well done.
I think it has some useful parallels in business. I think any sort of athletic endeavor, and even things like if you're trying to get healthy or you lose weight, all the things that you need, like the discipline and the goal setting and the planning and the accountability and the measuring, they're all things. I mean, I've done both. I've been overweight in the past and lost quite a bit of weight before I started the triathlon journey. So yeah, you can tap into some of those things to help you in life and business.
Well said, mate. I love that analogy. It doesn't matter if it's business, doesn't matter if it's life, health, wealth, for example, same pillars. It's having a goal, working towards it, surrounding yourself with the right people, feeding yourself good information, believing that you can get it done, and ignoring all the naysayers as well. So yeah, definitely some parallels there, mate. Thank you very much. And a little bit about yourself personally, mate. Do you want to share a little bit about your own personal journey?
Yeah, look, I normally start my presentations saying that when I grew up, I wanted to be a fighter pilot, just so people didn't think I'm a weirdo wanting to be a quantity surveyor, like in kindergarten when everyone else wants to be a policeman or a marine biologist. So look, I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to be when I realized I couldn't be a fighter pilot due to some health issues. And I had an interest in property and real estate and economics. And I was a real estate agent for about 9 or 10 months, terribly unsuccessfully. As an introvert, it wasn't for me. I've since learned some communication skills to be able to present and stuff, but I was a pretty shy fella. And then I moved into to the valuation space. I was going to be a valuer, but I changed my degree over over to a Bachelor of Construction Management and became a quantity surveyor. And now I'm very, very niched in the tax depreciation side of things. It's a weird thing to explain what I do at a barbecue, but I really enjoy it and I have a lot of fun. And outside of that, I've got a young family as well. So they keep me in or out of trouble depending on the day. Just got my pilot's license too, so I'm enjoying doing that for fun.
How good's that? And when you say just got my pilot license, you make it sound so casual. I've done one flight lesson. I'm like, this is far too overwhelming for me to get my head around.
There's a bit in it, but I definitely encourage you to stick with it. But you sort of got to create the space to be able to commit to something like that. You can't just sort of show up and go, all right, where are the keys?
Yeah, great, spot on. Mate, you mentioned something that you find a little bit hard to explain to people what you do. It's not that easy to articulate, for example. But if someone was to ask you, look, tell me a little bit more about what the role of a quantity surveyor is, or what the role of a depreciation schedule is, how do you go about articulating that, mate?
Yeah, I mean, I try and avoid the question and say I just need to go for a wee. But if I'm forced into a corner, right? A quantity surveyor is a construction cost estimator. So we're really the best profession to say how much it would cost something to build. And you could probably think of a billion different reasons why you might like to know. You might like to know because you need to insure your property and you want to make sure you're insuring for enough to rebuild the property, or you're wanting to do a development, and so you're kind of looking at the feasibility, or you're going to tender on a development, or you might be getting bank finance and the bank doesn't just give you $10 million and say good luck, because you tend to sort of disappear to Ecuador and buy a Ferrari, and there's all sorts of problems that come with that. When it comes to the tax depreciation side of things, it's almost like a hybrid sort of between a quantity surveyor and an accountant. In fact, we have to be registered tax agents to do tax depreciation, but we don't do tax returns or anything like that. But essentially any income producing property, you're able to claim deductions based on the wear and tear of the asset. So the simplest way to understand that is if you're a property investor, you own a property, you're renting it out, so you have to declare that income. But because you're providing a service, you're providing a house over someone's head, and the government's really out of that accommodation business, owning only about 2.5% of all stock. The investor has an important part to play. So you can actually claim deductions based on the decline in value of the structure and the fixtures and fittings, depending on different qualification dates.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. So that then, I guess, culminates to when an investor buys their investment property, they will then organise to get a depreciation schedule organised, a report done, which then shows what they're eligible to write off in their in that schedule. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it this way, if you're earning $100,000 a year and you have a depreciation schedule saying in that year you can claim $11,000 back, then in the eyes of the tax office, you're now only earning $89,000 a year. And the difference in tax payable goes from about, say, 24,000 to 20,000, very round numbers. So that's the difference in tax that you're paying. So tax depreciation doesn't really have to be more complicated than that from an investor's point of view. It's just enabling you to pay less tax.
Yeah, okay, cool. Damien, we haven't chat before, and Damien asked me around some of the recent legislation changes and like what they're eligible to claim, for example.
Yeah, that's right. So I had a question. With most of the depreciation schedules for properties, you're looking at newer properties for the maximum depreciation. If, for example, you purchase a property that's 2 years old, do you inherit the depreciation schedule from that previous owner?
Not normally, no. I mean, it does happen. And if those, the tax office sort of says if the costs are known, then we need to use them. And if you're given that, then you're able to use that. But they also say that you don't need to chase down the tax affairs of the previous person. So generally the case is no. So that's where we're able to come in and we're able to say, well, this is what the construction cost would be as at the time the property was built. And then, there might be some plant and equipment items in the mix if you've added things as well. But I wouldn't mind challenging the notion, if it's not too cheeky, I mean, this is your show, that that newer properties are better for depreciation. I think like that's something that I've been thinking about a lot, and that's a general term that a lot of people will say. And in fairness to you, even quantity surveyors will say. But there are times when you'll see a property that might have been built in the 1920s that's going to give you more depreciation deductions than a brand new project home. So if you think about some of the blue chip areas in Melbourne or Sydney, these properties could be, old terrace homes that are built in the 20s or the 30s, but they might have $1 million or $2 million worth of renovations. So that really, really old property will actually do better from the depreciation point of view than, say, a brand new house or a unit at a more modest construction value. So that's something important to understand as well.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate the clarification, because that's something that I'm trying to point the finger at an accountant. I do want to kind of preface our chat by saying this is general in nature and not intended to give advice. I guess that's a direction that comes primarily from the accountant, which is, hey, paying a large amount of tax, what can we do to minimize tax, negative gearing, or can we find ways of depreciation as well? Depreciation leads itself to possibly buying a new property. And that's where some of our clients will then come to go, and this is what I've been advised. Can we get some guidance? I'm really glad you kind of touched on that as well. As an investor, what are some of the other overlooked or uncommon ways that they're missing out on claiming some benefits as well? Like you're saying, an older property may present itself opportunity. What are some ways that you've seen from your experience that investors are maybe missing a trick here?
The older one's definitely a big one, right? And you're right that the advice that comes in can be misleading at times, and accountants can be guilty of it. And I present to the Accounting Business Expo every year and to the Institute of Public Accountants. And believe me, I'm trying to remind them that with those older properties, you can't just say, okay, well, it's built prior to the cutoff date for building structure deductions, which is 1987. You need to understand, well, what's the history of the property? Have you made any improvements or additions? So if you add a kitchen and a bathroom, these days that could be $50,000 or $60,000. Let's say it's $40,000 worth of structural works. At 2.5%, that's $1,000 worth of deductions available to you. So it's about the break-even point for a report being worthwhile. So that's an important thing to consider. So the first thing is not getting it done, right? Because you don't understand, or you think it's a little bit scary or complicated, or no one's ever told you about it, or someone's given you advice that it's not worthwhile. The other thing is waiting too long to actually get it done. So you can go and amend 2 previous years worth of tax returns, but what we've actually found is that we ran a study of 1,000 residential properties that we've done depreciation, we've completed depreciation schedules before, and we found that 6.7% of people actually waited more than the 2 years to get in touch with us. So they bought the property, more than 2 years elapsed, and then they got in touch with us. So anything more than that 2 years, then you're not able to backclaim those deductions under normal circumstances. And what we found, that the average missed deduction was $20,537. So, that could be $7 or $8 grand gone from your pocket. And if you're amending previous returns, you're also going to be incurring a fee to do that. But if you can backclaim, say, $10,000 or $20,000, then it's a no-brainer. But why I think that's important is you might kind of think, oh, well, 6.7% of people, that's not a lot, right? But if you extrapolate that across the investor population, which I did because our journalists like the big clickbaity stories, it actually works out to $2.88 billion worth of deductions that's just floating in the ether as unclaimed, right? Mm-hmm. And when you think about that 6.7%, those are 6.7% that we had the data on, i.e. they eventually came to us. What about the people that never did it, right? We can only research the people that actually eventually finally realized that they would be missing out. So the number could be a lot higher than that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the other one that we get taught about from an account perspective is manufacturing some depreciation. So what are some ways that I guess an investor can go about being smart to manufacture some growth in the property, but also some depreciation as well?
Manufacturing depreciation really comes down to expenditure. That's really the only thing that you can do after you're purchasing a property. And I think it's important to understand as well that depreciation is a bonus, not a strategy. And too many people go to their accountant and say, I need to buy an investment property. And the accountant might say, well, why is that? They say, I'm paying too much tax. And it sort of makes me think, well, does it matter if it goes up in value? Does it matter if it's a 2% yield or a 7% yield? It's just, I hate tax. Make the tax go away. And I get that, and that's part of my job, right? But it is just a bonus. But if you're wanting to get depreciation deductions or increase those deductions outside of the property, yes, buying a brand new property is generally better because you're going to get depreciation claims on the building structure and the plant and equipment items like ovens, cooktops, hot water systems, carpets and blinds. Now, the rules change in 2017 that you can only claim those items if they're brand new in a brand new property or you put the new assets in. Back in the day, you could buy a 2-year-old property and claim the leftover amount. You can't do that anymore. But if you want to get more deductions, then you have to make improvements to the property. But not all improvements are created equal because there's two main buckets of depreciation. Like I just mentioned, the structure and the plant and equipment. And to give you a good example, let's say you want to replace all of your floor coverings. So you're going to spend the same amount of money. You might spend $5,000 on the floor coverings, but you're tossing up between carpet and tile. Tile has an 8-year effective life according to the tax office, and with a few formulas, it translates to a 25% depreciation rate. So you get 25% of that $5,000 back as a deduction in the first year. Now, if you pick tile, that is actually considered part of the structure. So technically it has a 40-year effective life and a 2.5% depreciation rate. So you'll actually get 10 times more deductions for putting carpet in the property than you will tiles. It's the same over 40 years, but we're talking about a 10 times better difference up front. And that's where I think there's an important way that people can understand that by making those smart decisions, you can actually influence the cash flow of that property.
No, well said. Well said. I guess, these are decisions that you wouldn't give thought to unless you actually knew about it. Right? They just go ahead and capital tiles down and away we go. Perfect.
Yeah. And I mean, I've thought about it to the point where I'm sort of thinking, how worthwhile is it having, say, carpet in your kitchen just for those extra deductions? Probably a no-go. That's one of those things where you can't live your whole life based on, well, this will give you the best deductions. It's got to be something that the tenants are going to move in and going to want as well. And that's where I sort of think depreciation is a bonus. It's not a strategy, because if it was a strategy, everyone would have carpet in their kitchens and that would be gross.
How about carpet in your backyard? All the way through.
Well, artificial grass is a plant and equipment item, so it's better to have the fake stuff than the real stuff because you get nothing for that depreciation-wise. But I don't have artificial grass in my backyard. I have real grass.
Nothing like feel the real grass. Something you touched on very, very early was around underinsurance. And this comes up from time to time. And I think where it has is the rain that we've had, which then impacted properties and flood damage. And then we've had bushfires, for example, as well. Take us through, because this is all sits as part of the domain that you're looking at from building costs. How underinsured are we, and is it much of a problem?
I think it's an enormous problem. And it's something that we're very passionate about, and we've tried to be part of the solution, and we're trying to explain to people, and we have a product to sell. Let's disclose that out there. But whether you use us or somebody else, I think you need to understand the construction cost. So if somebody said, I got it done, that's my first bit of happiness. If they got it with us, that's a bonus. But I really think we are critically underinsured in Australia. And to put some context behind that, the Insurance Council of Australia pre-pandemic said that 83% of property owners were underinsured. Now, the reason why I say pre-pandemic is that construction costs have gone gangbusters since then. So we're talking, somewhere around a 20% increase over 18 months in construction costs. So that means that number is likely a lot higher. And a lot of people just don't really understand the cost to rebuild their home, and they're relying on tools and resources that aren't appropriate. One is property valuers. Now, I'm not qualified to provide a market valuation, but I would be very strongly saying that a valuer is not qualified to say how much it would cost to rebuild something. They do put it in many of their reports, but if you read the disclaimer, you'll see it can't be relied on. They need to use a quantity surveyor. The other thing is online calculators, and we've done audits on, I think it was 5 calculators. My business partner, Marty, shared some research on this, and the variance is well over 100% between them. And I think what people don't necessarily realize is that, I mean, I can remember being younger, buying my first home, and I saw an ad for one of those big builders, and, you know, you can build this for $230,000. I'm like, that's way better than my house. So if I insure my place for that, then I'll sort of get that at the end. But what people don't realize is that when, say, disaster happens, and yes, it could be a big event like a flood or a bushfire, but it could be just you leaving a heater on and your house burns down. It doesn't leave a nice, flat, level, clean block ready to go again. The property has to be demolished, and there's escalations in the cost based on, the tendering, and what was built there before might not actually be to code. So there's a million different reasons why what you're thinking about the rebuild cost is actually likely to mean that you're well undercooked.
Yeah. And how does someone go about understanding, one, what they're currently insured for, and two, what's a fairly good estimate to rebuild? Like, how do they go about reviewing and then renewing?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, right? And to be completely honest with you, the appetite for getting a quantity surveyor like myself to do that on a residential property is not there. So it's about the same cost as getting a tax depreciation schedule. But think about this. You get a depreciation schedule from me and it puts $2,000 back in your pocket, for example, or you get a replacement cost estimate for the same price and then your insurance premiums go up, right? It's a harder thing to sell, but we've changed the way that we've got a tagline in the business that we've changed, and it's maximize and protect, because we think we do a lot of work for property investors who've put a lot of effort into growing a portfolio, and maximizing works with the depreciation and maximizing the returns, and that's a lot of the education stuff that we do. But there's not a lot of discussion around the protection, and that's where I think it's really important. So a quantity surveyor is the best person to say how much it would actually cost to rebuild a property. We do a flat fee of $600 plus GST for anything under $10 million when we can get access to plans. So yes, there's a cost to it, but that peace of mind for someone that's built a reasonable asset base, or even the median house price, Sydney, I think last month just ducked under $1 million, but $1 million is a lot to spend on a property. Why not make sure that it's adequately insured?
Oh, correct. I mean, yeah, the first thing that comes to my mind is everyone knows the replacement value of their car, for example, but if you're saying we don't know the replacement value of our home, like the home's got to be a far greater asset compared to our cars, who are depreciating liabilities at times as well, right?
That's a good analogy, and maybe it's more likely to have an accident in your car than you can't drive your house somewhere, right? So maybe the risks are less, but the risk is also inherently higher because of the value of it, right? Most people's houses are worth a lot more than their cars.
Right. Yes. Now, as part of facilitating a lot of depreciation schedules across the country, you're probably getting a good feel for where investors are going, the type of activity and what type of properties they're buying and where they're buying. Do you go down to that level of research in your business and with your team, going, hey, look, this is where a lot of investor activity is going on, and almost not like a heat map, but a bit of a feel?
Yeah, we absolutely do. Probably less with the team, because it doesn't necessarily sort of help them, and they've got to be a real kind of property nerd like me, right? So I've got one person in the office that helps me with those research projects, and we were the first in the space to do it, and partially because we want to share information that we have access, that even the likes of ABS and CoreLogic don't collect some of the stuff that we collect in the when we're doing a depreciation schedule. Like, for example, how many people live in their property prior to making it a rental property? I've never seen any data available on that apart from the stuff that we've been able to crunch. And we found that a quarter of people live in their property prior to it becoming a rental. And that has some implication for deductions and those sorts of things. But yes, every question that we need to ask the client to produce our report, we collect that data. And when we do the report, we're also, doing site inspections. So we're looking at, how big the property is. We're estimating the construction values. We're crunching all that. So we've got a tremendous amount of data points that we're putting in basically a 1,000 assets report that we're releasing every year. That'll be in production again in the next month or so, but I can certainly share with some of that past data with you.
That'd be fantastic. I love it. And then Damien and I were having a chat about, I guess, overcapitalizing as well. And so talking about when someone's going to renovate a property, best bang for your buck versus maybe overcapitalizing or overspending on some renovations as well. Have you got any tips or any guidance based on when you're coming in? People that maybe overcapitalize, or that's smart money spent to get a good return as well.
Yeah, I mean, our data, we're looking specifically at the investor space. And what we're actually finding is that people that occupy their property prior at turning into a rental normally spend around about double than what someone would spend on that property if it's a rental from day one and it stays that way. Okay. So that to us kind of gave rise to this notion that there's an accidental investor, right? Because, well, why is it the case that they're spending more when they're living in it? So I think the intention is that they might have thought that they were going to live there forever, but then, they've upgraded or they've moved and they've retained that property. But in terms of bang for buck renos, we talked about the carpet and the tile example, but it's more important to have your renovation strategy serve your property investing goals than it is your tax goals, right? Because if you were to overcapitalize on a property, then that's going to be great for depreciation, because really the more you spend, the more you get back. Yeah. But, if you've got a $400,000 older property in a regional area, it's not going to give you a premium because it has a helicopter pad, like it's just silly, right? So I think when it comes to bang for buck, it's all the sort of simple things, things like painting. Obviously, kitchen and bathrooms are a great one, but, floor coverings and window furnishings, there's sort of some of those lower cost items. And, even things like air conditioning, split systems. The tenants are potentially looking at this property saying, is this somewhere that I can call my home, So they want to be comfortable and those sorts of things. So it's probably less important to think about the deductions than it is how that's kind of serves that investment. But really, any dollar that you're spending on improving the property, you will be able to claim deductions on.
Yeah, okay, cool. Nate, thank you very much. I know that we had a chat about your first home, the LinkedIn post, which again, we had a chat about your LinkedIn post around stamp duty. Do you want to?
Yeah, so obviously dealing with a lot of first home buyers in Sydney at the moment, and everyone's talking a lot about this new scheme to waive stamp duty in favour of a property tax. As a first home buyer coming up myself, I am excited to hopefully waive the stamp duty. Just want to get your opinions on the pros and cons of this new scheme as you see it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because when you sort of say waive the stamp duty, well, it's like, well, it's not necessarily a waive. It's just kind of a recalculation of we're going to get that money from you, but we're going to do it in a different way. The obvious problem for first homeowners that I see is the deposit hurdle, right? Like getting that upfront cash, which includes the stamp duty. So being able to elect to that, to the ongoing land tax model, I think is going to be really, really attractive to the first homeowners, right? And you might even know better than I on this, but if you've transacted on a property in the last little while, you can actually submit to go and swap over and get a rebate to that system. And apparently that system's going to be very heavily subscribed. So I think it's good. It helps people to get into the market. But on the negative side, it is still a tax on the property. You are still paying that, and that is kind of onerous on the homeowner. But it's also kind of stimulating more interest in the property, right? So the lower value properties that typically first homeowners will go for, become more expensive. So great if you can be part of this system, but then for everyone else, often the house price goes up. Look, when you think about the first homeowner grants and those sorts of things, this is just kind of a similar theme on that, right? And it's a stimulatory thing. So it does kind of, in my view, put a fire under the bottom of house prices, where if we're going to solve the bigger problem, we've got to look at things like supply. We've got to look at other housing costs like rental affordability, because if you're aspiring to be a first homeowner and it takes you a while to save, well, you've got to exist in that rental zone. And, rental affordability is absolutely dire. We're talking about 16-year lows in terms of vacancy rate. So anyone that's renting out there is having a real tough time.
And just quickly on that, what's driving the shortage of rental properties at the moment?
Well, a lot of people have sold their property, so that's an obvious one, right? So I haven't seen much data from the big property management firms, like the Ray Whites and the LJ Hookers, but anecdotally, a lot of them have mentioned to me that they've lost big chunks of their property management pool. So a lot of property investors left the space, I think, to lock in some of the profits from the price rises during the pandemic. But there's also been a lot of intervention that has made property less attractive for owners. And a lot of that comes from the state. So we saw the Palaszczuk government talking about the land tax issue, where they're looking at, your entire portfolio across the property. There was a lot of talk from the Greens about a moratorium on rental increases. There's been a lot of legislation, and it's not all bad, right? As property investors, you've got an obligation to provide a safe, comfortable environment, but there has been a lot placed on investors that's, potentially eroding the returns. It's giving them less confidence in their long-term property investment goal. And we've also kind of seen a lot of the Airbnb style market come onto the long-term market when we couldn't travel. So there's a few different reasons why it's gone bad, but investor activity has been quite subdued. So there's just not that much available.
Yeah, and I guess, you've talked about government, the role of government as well. So the supply is obviously one issue, then the cost to build is another issue. Then you've got, I guess the stimulus for first-time buyers to try and get into the market, but competing against someone that's going to try and rent, for example, as well. So there's competing priorities, and at the moment we're talking about 16-year lows. That cost to rent is just going up and up. So it's a real pressure on households that are renting. So we talk about people that have a mortgage and their repayments have gone up. The same pain is being felt by people that are renting as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and the bad news is that I don't see it getting any better sooner. We've got a lot of international migration coming back, so there's going to be more demand because most of those migrants will be in the rental market rather than necessarily purchasing property. And the forecast for building activity is pretty soft as well. So there's no real end in sight for that pain. The government, has made some grandiose statements about, building hundreds of thousands of homes in budget speeches and that sort of stuff. But that's, kind of just close to the long-term average. Government is kind of out of the social housing business from my view in many ways. So it does kind of fall on the investors to be able to pick that piece up. But, investors have been demonized quite a lot in the last few years. We had two elections where negative gearing was on the table, and that was very poorly understood by policymakers. We had the Royal Commission into the banking, we had the APRA intervention, and still today we're seeing investor loans being higher than PPOR loans, right? So there's a lot of things that are kind of making disincentives for investors, and I think that, whatever your view, if you want rents to go down, you need more participation from investors in the market.
Yeah, well said. Well said, Mike. Thanks very much. We're going to eagerly await for your report to come out, because I feel like it's going to have a good amount of info in there as well. And I think once that's ready to come out, we'll definitely get you back on at some point in the future, have a chat about some of your findings, your research, and also what the market's doing for this year ahead, mate. So I want to say thank you so much for your time and your energy and your insights as well. Really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. That's a wrap for another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. If you'd love to reach out to Mike Mortlock, his team at MCG, we'll include details to their website and their socials to check them out as well. And if you're an investor that's kind of curious about this, when you talk about your depreciation schedules and you do want to have a chat, by all means, we'll include their contact details as well. If you found this episode helpful, feel free to leave us a review, or even better yet, if you've got some questions that you'd like answered, please drop us a line with those questions and we'd love to get them solved for you as well. Until next time, take care.